In spite of lower cost, more efficient, and higher quality education, the role of industry in providing scholarships and educational TV, it is probable that some children would get very little education, and a few might go through life as illiterates. These would be children who lacked either the capacity or the desire for learning, since children who had both the ability and desire would tend to attract help, even if their parents did neglect them. Before calling for a government to educate these unschooled and illiterate few, however, one should consider the shockingly high rate of illiterates graduated from government high schools. Sitting in a schoolroom for a period of years is not equivalent to receiving an education. In fact, children who are forced to sit through years of schooling, which they find painfully boring, are far more likely to rebel against their imprisonment and society in general than to develop a love of knowledge. No one can be taught unless he has a genuine desire to learn, and forcing schooling on a child against his will is hardly likely to increase this desire. Competing educational systems would offer the consumer a free choice in his purchase of education for himself and or his children. This would end forever squabbles over curriculum, more athletics, more academics, black studies programs, student body, segregated or integrated. Shall we bus to integrate? Control of education? Should it be in the hands of parents, teachers, voters, the school board, or the colleges? And all the other insoluble questions which plague government's coercive control of education. If each consumer were free to choose among competing schools the type of education he valued most, all these problems would be solved automatically to the satisfaction of everyone. Competition in education would protect students and parents from exploitation by a coercive governmental monopoly. In a similar manner, competition would protect the consumer in every other field. If any firm tried to exploit its customers or employees, it would be signaling other firms to enter into competition with it in order to reap some of the profits it was enjoying. But this competition would quickly bid prices down, quality up, or wages up, as the case might be, and eliminate the exploitation. In a free market, consumers always have alternatives. Only force or fraud can compel a man to act against his judgment, but a firm which initiated force or used fraud in a free market would drive away its customers. Coercive monopolies are the product of government and can't exist without government support. In a laissez-faire society, the economy would be free of exploitation, both by government and by business seeking to establish and maintain market control by force or fraud. It has been objected that a very large firm could afford to use force and fraud to at least a limited extent because the breadth of its market would prevent the news of its aggressive actions from reaching enough of its customers and competitors to do it serious damage. This is to overlook the role of the news media in a laissez-faire society. As a test, take the front page of any metropolitan daily and count the headlines which have nothing at all to do with any government, national, state, or local. Unless there has just been some natural disaster, you will probably find no more than 2 or 3, sometimes none. Newsmen must write about something, since that's how they make their living. If there were no government, they would have to shift their emphasis to the doings of outstanding individuals, business, and industry. Not only inventions and medical scientific discoveries would be news, so would any aggression or fraud, especially when committed by large and well-known companies. It's very hard to hide things from hotly competing newspapermen looking for a scoop, not to mention the representatives of radio, television, movies, magazines, and the wire services. In a laissez-faire society where there was no government to claim the lion's share of the spotlight, it would be considerably more difficult to keep any departure from integrity hidden. Of course, stiff competition between business is the consumer's best guarantee of getting a good product at a reasonable price. Dishonest competitors are swiftly voted out of business by consumers. But in addition to competition, the market would evolve means of safeguarding the consumer which would be vastly superior to the contradictory, confusing, and harassing weight of governmental regulations with which the bureaucrats claim to protect us today. One such market protection would be consumer rating services, which would test and rate various products according to their safety, effectiveness, cost, etc. Since the whole existence of these rating services would depend on their being right in their product evaluations, they would be extremely thorough in their tests, scrupulously honest in their reports, and nearly impossible to bribe, which is not always true of government officials. Businesses whose products were potentially dangerous to consumers would be especially dependent on a good reputation. Drug manufacturers, for example, would know that if their products caused any illness or death through poor quality, insufficient research and preparation, or inadequate warnings on the labels, they would lose customers by the thousands. The good reputation of a manufacturer's brand name would be its most precious asset, an asset which no firm would knowingly risk. Besides this, drugstores would strive for a reputation of stocking only products which were high quality, safe when properly used, and adequately labeled. In place of the present inflexible, cumbersome, and expensive prescription system, they might employ pharmacists for the sole purpose of advising customers who wanted to know which medicines to take and not to take, and whether their ailments were serious enough to require the attention of a physician. A practice which would take a great load of minor complaints off the shoulders of overworked doctors and sharply reduce the cost of medical service. A good reputation would also be important to doctors in absence of government-required licensing. Of course, any man would be free to hang out a shingle and call himself a doctor, but a man whose treatments harmed his patients couldn't stay in business long. Besides, reputable physicians would probably form medical organizations which would only sanction competent doctors, thereby providing consumers with a guide. Insurance companies who have a vested interest in keeping their policyholders alive and healthy would provide another safeguard in the field of drugs and medical care. Insurance companies might well charge lower rates on life and health insurance to policyholders who contracted to use only those medicines and to patronize only those doctors sanctioned by a reputable medical association. This free market system of consumer protection would end the doctor shortage and drastically reduce the cost of most medical care, since anyone could practice medicine in any area in which he was competent, regardless of the number of years he'd spent in college, or not spent in college, as the case might be. A brain surgeon might require 12 years of formal training, while a doctor who treated colds, flu, and ingrown toenails might need only 2 or none. The free market system wouldn't commit the absurdity of requiring the same basic training for the colds and ingrown toenails man as for the brain surgeon, thereby putting their fees on nearly the same level. The efficiency of these free market safeguards contrasts sharply with the way the Food and Drug Administration protects us. The FDA doesn't want anyone to be killed by drugs. That would look bad for the FDA's record. But they don't care how many people die of diseases because governmental restrictions prevented the development and sale of curative drugs. Those deaths can't be blamed on the FDA effectively, yet. Insurance companies, on the other hand, are deeply concerned with keeping their policyholders from dying for any reason at all. They would, therefore, not only discourage the use of harmful medications, but they would also encourage the discovery and development and sale of helpful ones. The free market way of doing things is always superior to the only method government can use: coercion, as freedom is always superior to slavery.